Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at these suggestions passed to developers again, this time for the naval part of the suggestions passed, and the interesting thing is a bunch of these, once again, have at least been looked at in the past. The Yamato is on this list and we've definitely had a look at it, so the general thing is we'll go over certain ones but not in a huge amount of detail because we've already chatted about them in the past, basically. There are some really cool ones in this list though, and many which I'm sure will come to the game, but as always, let's have a look. We start off with America, with the North Carolina class of battleships, the USS North Carolina and the USS Washington. This article is really tough to get through. It's incredibly weirdly written, and as we've said many times with a lot of these past to developers, one of the things that is super important is people proofreading these things, and that can literally just be sat there just going through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the first, the background of the ships and also the development history of the ships. Not going to go into the individual ships themselves because it's literally just reporting where they were during the war. But yeah, just to understand, we're going to do it verbatim and just to kind of show you what I mean. The North Carolina class was a class of 2 battleships built between 1937 to 41. The previous class of battleships were the Colorado class ships, with the 1920s South Dakota design being scrapped due to the Washington Naval Treaty. This treaty was also followed by the London Naval Treaty, was agreement between all the major naval powers, especially Great Britain, United States, and Japan, plus France and Italy, being the other 2 less powerful naval powers as the main naval powers present in these treaties. And in the case of the Washington Naval Treaty, which sought to limit battleships' construction as well as cease any for a period of time, as each nation had its own good reason to agree with a treaty of this form, in which after all these negotiations, funny enough, the ones who got what they wanted the most was Italy, which wanted to be allowed a navy equal in size to the French, which was exactly what they wanted. Out of this treaty, each nation was allowed to build/complete or keep certain battleships. In this case, the United States was allowed the 3 Colorado battleships. Japan was allowed to keep both Nagato-class ships in exchange for the United States having the 3rd Colorado, and the British were allowed the 2 Nelson-class ships, which were the only battleships under construction that were permitted as a part of this treaty. These were nicknamed the Big Seven, as they were the ships with the largest guns at the time. By this point, one may wonder why it's important to mention the Washington Naval Treaty when they're talking about these ships, which is quite simple. These ships, as mentioned previously, were built between 1937 to 41. The Colorado class was built between 17 to 23, meaning that by the time construction on the North Carolina class started, construction 20 years after the first Colorado class battleship had been started on, and as a result, with this 20-year gap, the North Carolina class was extremely different in design compared to their predecessors. Even though North Carolina started in 1937, the design of the class was started in 1928. These ships were designed with the limitation of the Panama Canal in mind, as well as the treaty limits in mind, to an extent as gun caliber would comply. The gun would range from 14-inch to 16-inch. However, displacement in many purpose designs would go over the permitted limit of 35,000 tons in the Washington Naval Treaty. This would, as a result, limit the capabilities of the ship's design. In 1935, 3 designs, which were designed as fast battleships, would be submitted to the General Board of the Navy. Unlike the previous Colorado class, these ships were not based around the standard battleship concept, but rather were actually focused on improving their ability, rather than keep designs similar with only gradual improvements. Design A was 32,150 long tons, armed with 9 14-inch guns in triple turrets positioned forward of the bridge, capable of 30 knots, and armored against 14-inch shells. Design B and C were similar, with both of them being 36,000 long tons, which obvious ruled them out as acceptable, able to reach 30.5 knots and armored against 14-inch shells. As for the major difference between the two was the planned main battery. Design B had 12 14-inch guns in triple turrets, while Design C had 8 16-inch guns in dual turrets. The first 3 designs would not be the end, however, as more designs would come up that year, with Designs D and E still remaining around the fast battleship idea. Design F was a hybrid carrier design, with 8 14-inch guns aft that reportedly FDR favoured. However, thanks to sanity, it was determined that as the design used 3 catapults, would have launched aircraft inferior to land-based aircraft, and so nothing would come to Design F. The last 2 designs, G and H, were same designs, however. Compared to Designs A, D, and E, these designs were slower, being capable of 23-knot ships and 9 14-inch guns, and in particular, Design H was thought to be a very well-balanced design by the preliminary design section of the Bureau of Construction and Repair. However, the General Board finally decided to use faster ships, which G and H were not. Now, basing of the faster designs, more designs would be based on these, in which they would sacrifice armor for the larger 16-inch guns, while others would do the opposite, in which they would sacrifice firepower with 14-inch guns, in exchange for more armor, with the designs having different turret layouts as well as armor thickness. In the end, 35 designs would be proposed as final designs in November that year. After assessing the designs as addressing some flaws in the designs, in 1936, Design 16C, which was armed with 3 quad 14-inch turrets. However, one characteristics with the design that changed was so that the ships could take part advantage if the escalation clause of the Naval Treaty or London Naval Treaty was invoked, in which they would instead use 3 triple 16-inch turrets with 2 forward and 1 aft on the ship. The timing of this decision would benefit the ships, as this would allow them to switch to the 16-inch armament even after they had their keels laid down, and the escalation clause would be invoked, meaning they would never receive the 14-inch guns. The same author got one pass for Germany too, so we're just going to read the background verbatim once again, because each individual ship literally just has its standard stuff laid out as well. The Type 101 and 101A Hamburg class destroyers are native destroyers for Germany. The Type 101 Hamburg class of destroyers is a class of 4 German destroyers built for West Germany during the Cold War. These ships were very unique due to the fact that they were the only destroyer class built in Germany following the Second World War. That is not to say that the ships were the only class of destroyers West Germany operated, with the previous 119's Astoria class, which were Fletcher class destroyers. The Hamburgs would not be the last German destroyer to be built for and serve in the West German Navy, as the Lutyens class destroyers would be built in the US, which were themselves modified Charles F. Adams class destroyers. These ships are comparable in capability to that of the trainer cruiser Deutschland, and technologically wise, they were built to be similar to the Kern-class frigates found in the game already, which is why they may remind one of those ships. They were armed with original 4 DCN 100mm L55 guns in the same general layout, with 2 at the forward part of the ship and 2 at the rear part of the ship. Additionally, they came with 5 hull-mounted 533mm torpedo tubes, with 3 in the bow, while the other 2 were placed in the stern. This was also reinforced with 2 additional 533mm single torpedo tubes mounted on the deck, with 1 on each side like the Kern frigates in game. These ships also came equipped with 4 twin 40mm Bofor mounts for anti-air. To top it off, they came with 2 quad-mounted 375mm Bofors ASW rocket launchers. They additionally came with 2 depth charge racks, which could carry 5 in each of the rack. Over time, however, as technology became more advanced and that anti-ship missiles became more prevalent, these ships would see their armament change, which would see them transferred into the 101A configuration. This saw them with now only 3 of the DCN 100mm L55 guns, with the Super Fire rear turret being removed in order to install 2 twin-box launchers for the MM38 Exocet SSM. Additionally, they now receive newer AA guns in the form of 4 twin 40mm Breda Mod 64 AA guns. the ones also found on the Kern frigates in-game. The other big change was the removal of all hull-mounted torpedo tubes, as the ships now received 2 additional 533mm torpedo tubes, which were placed beside the pre-existing ones, bringing the total of deck torpedo tubes to 4. As for the ASW rockets, they were kept and never modified nor had any additional mounts added, and nothing changed with the depth charge racks. Due to the company who was tasked with designing the ships, all 4 would end up being haunted from design flaws with the ships. For Russia, we have the Sevastopol-class battleship, the Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya, or Leningrad Sentinel. The last of the Sevastopol, or Gangut-class battleships to be commissioned, and also originally named Gangut, the class namesake in foreign texts. It served in the Baltic Fleet in the First World War, and participated in the February Revolution of 1917 and the ice cruise from Helsinki to Kronstadt. In 1918, it was laid up due to crew shortages and later renamed Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya, or October Revolution. It underwent repairs and a refit in the mid-1920s, rejoining the fleet in 1926. In 1931, after completion of Marat's modernization, Oktyabrskaya Revolyutsiya was started. The force superstructure was greatly expanded, with a stronger design compared to Marat's, which allowed for a fire director to be added and more crew quarters. A second aft tower was constructed, which allowed a second fire director to be fitted. 2 large cranes were also mounted on the aft tower, meant for seaplanes and boats. The main battery guns were slightly modernized, which allowed for easier barrel replacement, and the turret roof armor was reinforced to 152mm. 6 76mm Lender guns and 24 7.62mm Maxim machine guns were added as AA guns. The boilers were replaced with 12 from the unfinished battlecruiser Ismail, which were much more efficient than the originals, needing less for the same power and allowing the installation of an additional bulkhead to improve underwater protection. Work was completed in 1934, and the ship later participated in the Winter War, bombarding a Finnish coastal battery. Its AA guns were reinforced in 1941, and the cranes removed, and at the start of Operation Barbarossa was based at Tallinn. The rapid German advance forced the ship to retreat to Kronstadt, and minefields placed by Axis forces removed the ability of the Baltic Surface Fleet to conduct operations. October Revolution and Marat shelled German forces advancing onto Leningrad and was badly damaged by bombs in September, knocking out 2 turrets. The ship's repair lasted until November of 42, and it supported the Soviet breakout from Leningrad in 44. It was reinforced with more AA guns and armor plates during the war, and a British air warning radar in 1944. In June of that year, it fired the last combat shots of any Soviet battleship and was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for its service. Post-war, October Revolution remained in the fleet and was reclassified as a school battleship in 1954. In 1956, it was decommissioned, and its hull slowly scrapped over the next few years. For Britain, you have the destroyer leader, the HMS Swift. One of the first Sea Lord Jackie Fisher's many ambitious ideas for a modern navy, the HMS Swift was meant to replace all contemporary destroyers and scouts in the Royal Navy, being larger and faster than all of its contemporaries. Designed for 36 knots to be able to screen Fisher's battlecruiser squadrons and was almost as large as contemporary light cruisers, the Camel-led shipyard was chosen to build the design in 1905, and HMS Swift was officially ordered in 1906 to a very expensive tune of £233,764, I believe. Building took longer than anticipated due to the new machinery that had to be tested and constructed to try to hit the 36-knot speed target. In 1909, the ship was completed and ran its trials, only reaching just over 35 knots because of the heavier-than-expected machinery, and was commissioned in 1910. The ship was too large to operate with existing destroyers and torpedo boats, and its machinery layouts made it vulnerable to gunfire, while also carrying a relatively light armament. But its first captain thought it would be an exceptional scout ship, as it had good seakeeping and fast acceleration, and was fitted with a new wireless set. However, the very high price tag prevented any more of its type to be constructed, and it would remain the largest British destroyer until the Tribal class. When the Great War broke out, HMS Swift was employed as a leader or a destroyer leader. It was assigned to the 4th Torpedo Boat Flotilla as its leader in the North Sea Patrol. Its torpedoes were meant to be upgraded to 533 ones, but it seems that the refit never happened. In 1915, it was transferred to the Dover Patrol as part of the 6th Destroyer Flotilla, where it would remain at for the rest of the year. In 1916, as German destroyers rearmed with 105mm guns started dueling the ships of the Dover Patrol, HMS Swift was rearmed with a 16-inch gun at the bow in order to outgun them, which it retained for the rest of its service. Additionally, it was fitted with anti-aircraft guns and an enlarged superstructure. The ship fought German torpedo boats with its new armament at the Second Battle of Dover Strait, where it and HMS Broke sunk 2 German torpedo boats, while taking significant damage themselves, with Swift having to tow Broke back to port. After the war, the ship was put into reserve and then decommissioned and scrapped in 1921. Its armament in 1917 was 1 6-inch gun, 2 4-inch guns, 1 57mm Hotchkiss 6-pounder QF, 1 40mm Vickers 2-pounder, and 2 450mm torpedoes, with 4 torpedoes in tow. Then we have the battleship, the Vittorio Veneto, which was part of the Vittorio class. This new class of battleships was set up in 1934, with the first 2 battleships with the names of Vittorio and Vittorio Veneto. They were later joined by 2 more, the Roma and the Impero, set in 1938. The nucleus of the most beautiful, successful, and powerful battleships of the Regia Marina since its foundation, therefore began to take shape on paper in 1932. The Ship Projects Committee was in fact charged with preparing the construction plans for 2 large battleships, in which all the best qualities of a modern battleship were combined, both in terms of comparison with foreign units, both as regards the technique of materials and the most advanced construction concepts. After so many years of distance, we can certainly say that the job was reached or completed in an excellent way, also because for a lucky one coincidentally, in those years engineer Umberto Pugliese reached the rank of Inspector General of Naval Engineering, to whom he was entrusted with the direction of the project. He had spent his entire career in the continuous improvement of studies related to the new shipbuilding. The first to be launched was the Vittorio Veneto, which went into the sea on the 25th of May 1937. The second to be launched was the Littorio on the 22nd of August 1937. 2 years later, the Roma was launched, and the battleship Impero, however, was never finished. Although the Vittorio Veneto is considered the second unit of the Littorio class, it was first to be delivered during the war in the Mediterranean. She participated in 56 war missions, 11 of which were aimed at hunting down enemy ships. After the armistice on the 8th of September 1943, the Vittorio Veneto, together with the Littorio, was interned at the Bitter Lakes in the Suez Canal in Egypt. At the end of the Second World War, it returned to Italy and was demolished, starting in 1948. For France, you have the Normandie Class battleships. Basically, in 1912, as the creation of the first dreadnought series, the Corvette class, was pretty much underway, the French Parliament voted in favour of a massive modernization program to catch up with the biggest navies of its time, as a big part of the French Navy was obsolete. The idea was to bring the number of capital warships of the French Navy to 28 through 4 classes. The Corvette class, laid down in 1911 and finished in 1913, the Bretagne class, laid down in 1912 and finished in 15, and the Normandie class and the Lyon class. The international growing tensions in the 1910s pushed the French government to agree to lay down 4 battleships at once, starting in 1913, instead of only 2. Among those warships, the first battleships of what would become the Normandie class, the Normandie, the Flandre, the Gascon, and also Languedoc, the Béarn would also follow soon after, in January of 1914. These warships differed a lot from their predecessors in many ways. The adoption of a quad-turret design reduced the weight of the ship, allowing for a better armour and also better propulsion. This allowed the ship to bring its armour up to 300mm, and its speed up to 21 knots. It also allowed for a much shorter construction time, thanks to a simpler hull and overall configuration. And indeed, when the war started, the first 4 ships of the series were well underway. They had been launched and the construction of the superstructure had begun. However, as the dire situation on the Western Front had morphed into attrition warfare, the workforce of the French dockyards was sent to the front, leaving the battleships unfinished. The 340mm cannons that were to equip the quad turrets were also converted to field and also railway guns on land. After the war, the construction of the battleships resumed for a short while, before ceasing completely. By 1922, the ships were being brought to a ship graveyard to be dismantled. Why did this happen? Well, there's 3 reasons. The design, heavily based on the Bretagne class, was judged obsolete, as the speed was considered insufficient, and the hull too vulnerable to the plague that had become submarine warfare. Indeed, the ship had poor seafaring abilities due to its short length, and the reason for that was the dockyards in which they were built were too small, and a longer hull would have stabilized the overall ship better. France, as with most powers participating in World War I, was ruined after the war, and the cost of finishing those ships didn't help convincing French politicians at the time. And also the Washington Naval Treaty, the final nail in the French coffin, prevented the French Navy from regaining part of its lost naval force during the war, and drastically reduced the overall size by pairing it with a much smaller Italian navy. In any case, the last warship of the class, Béarn, was early enough in its construction stages so it could be converted into an aircraft carrier. The rest of the ships were sold to scrapyards and dismantled between 1924 and 26. Then we have the Jacinto-class corvettes, the BRP Artemio Riccardi, the PS-37. Basically, this was originally the HMS Starling and was used for patrol duties in Hong Kong. But with the return of Hong Kong to China, it was sold to the Philippine Navy, along with the HMS Peacock and the Plover, in August 1997 for $20 million as a token of goodwill. At the time of her introduction, the Jacinto class was the most sophisticated ship in the Philippine Navy at the time. Soon after their introduction into the naval forces, the Jacinto class was modified to enhance the firepower, with 4 7.62mm guns being replaced by 2 12.7mm M2s and 2 20mm Mark 16 guns respectively. In 2003, it was decided to implement the JCPV upgrade project in order to operate the Jacinto class more effectively after 20 years in service, and the Jacinto class was to be updated in 3 phases over the next years. In Phase 1, the optical tracking system, maritime radar, gyro compass, GPS, etc. were upgraded, and an MSI Defense Seahawk DS-25-25mm was added to the aft section of the vessel. Phase 2, titled Marine Engineering Upgrade Program, included hull repairs, overhaul of the main propulsion system, and maintenance of the hull, etc. The original plan was for Phase 2 to be completed by the end of 2005, but due to budget shortfalls in the Philippine Navy, the refit project was very slow because the Philippine Navy chose to prioritize the refit of 2 ships, the Emilio Jacinto and the Apolinario Mabini, with their resources. The Phase 2 refit finally started in 2013, but Artemio Riccardi will take a long time to leave the dock. Phase 3 was originally scheduled to be given a service life extension program, but the plans were changed and replaced with a combat system alignment project to improve the combat capability of the Jacinto class. Artemio Riccardi underwent a modification called Phase 3A, which included an FCS by Ultra Electronics, a new maritime radar to replace the maritime radar introduced in Phase 1, and an overhaul of both the Otto Malaris 76mm and the 25. This refit was done after the end of Phase 2, and Artemio spent 9 years of idle time at the dock until Phase 2 and Phase 3A refits were completed. But the refit was finally completed in November 2022, and is now working with Emilio Jacinto and also Apolinario Mabini, and is now a member of the Philippine Navy. So overall, you can see there's a lot of naval forces that were passed. The one which I will cover in a separate video is the Yamato, because I need to basically just check if it's been passed before or not. because I'm pretty sure it has, but at the same time, I've got to see if it's the same article. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Schnitzel Stroker, Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, B. Young, Opium Prime, Masonocrat, Lafouche, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.